So my name is Rick Haskell, and I'm an associate professor of finance here at Westminster College, where I'm also the director for the college's Center for Financial Wellness. But more importantly, and I got to be honest with you, I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I adore my wife. I adore spending time with my children, who aren't babies anymore. My youngest currently is 30, and my oldest is going to be 40 here very quickly. But I've spent a lifetime providing for them and giving, and it's given me some really interesting opportunities. Those opportunities led me here to Westminster College, of course, and to having earned a doctorate in economics from the University of Utah, to being able to teach finance and economics to students here, as well as every once in a while to students at the University of Utah as well. I enjoy what I get to do here. I enjoy the perspective that my life has given me and feel extraordinarily blessed because of that perspective. So I became interested in finance and economics really even before I did my undergraduate work. I had an opportunity to spend a couple of years in upstate New York with some other people working together on some things that were very important to us. And my opportunity ended up landing me in a position where I had to understand something about the finances of the operation. And then I had to understand something about investing some of the surplus that operation spun off. And that gave me a perspective that I never imagined I would have. It gave me an opportunity to view some things that I would never have expected. And that really led me to a college education at Brigham Young University focused on investment and finance. That led me then to a career in finance. And during all of that, I began to realize that finance was simply microeconomics at the level of the firm. And even though I'd only taken one economics course at BYU, and it was a very rudimentary one, it was the introduction to economics as a social science. There is no level of rigor in that class, but it got some things turned into the back of my little head. It's planted some seeds, if you will. And over the decades of business ownership, I began to look at things more and more and more from an economist's perspective. And I read and I studied and I listened to everything that I possibly could until finally, in my 50s, I took an opportunity, having sold some businesses, took an opportunity to enter into a graduate program and then a doctoral program in economics. And doing that was just the catalyst to open things up even further. And so what was interesting to me became very instrumental to me to become a passion for me. And I'm just nothing but grateful for having had the opportunity and experience. So I had an opportunity to go to work for a company by the name of Dean Witter, which is today Morgan Stanley. Dean Witter was one of the largest investment firms in the country at the time. Morgan Stanley still is. It was an extraordinary opportunity. I had a chance to start as a stockbroker in the San Francisco Bay Area, and then took a management assignment, and then went to New York with the company in management, and then down into Texas to take a regional assignment. And it was tremendous exposure, and one that I will tell you that at the end of that, I had mixed feelings about, because I worked myself all the way into a position where I got fired. I usually tell people we had a parting of the ways, but the fact of the matter is I was a little too big for my britches, and I got myself summarily dismissed and had to put my tail between my legs. But as it turns out, one of the best experiences I've ever had. Made me really rethink things and made me have a different perspective on how we should act, how we should comport ourselves, and what we should do to stretch and how far we should or should not stretch. And my family and I then took the opportunity to return here to Utah, where my wife and I had met. I had an opportunity to do some work with a company that I had some ownership in for a period of years. That was an investment for me, and we expanded that company to the point that we sold my part of it and then used that money to invest in another company that we expanded again until we sold it, and that then let me have the resources to create another investment firm of my own rather than someone else's. And that then led me to investment management, private equity, a little bit of VC work, and interacting with private equity and VC and big lenders that have given me a tremendous exposure. And it was at the end of 30 years of that, having then sold that business, that allowed me to step back for a moment, earn my master's first in economics, and then earn my doctorate in economics, all the while having had 30 plus years of experience that I could think about the application for these things. See, it's very different being in school and learning through textbooks and such. Even when you're talking to someone as a faculty member that has some sense of business, very different than when you're talking with someone that's doing business, that hasn't just sometimes been involved, but it's been everything for their profession. And even today, I'm still actively engaged in business outside of the college. I work a little bit with Goldman Sachs, and I do some work with private clients. So I think my students very quickly realize that I'm not the sharpest tack in the drawer. Don't get me wrong, I don't think I'm a dullard, but I have some attributes that serve myself, my family, and hopefully my students well. I have a fair amount of discipline. In fact, sometimes I will joke and say that I'll work a mere mortal under the table. I think that a 60-hour work week is when we're just warming up to get going. I also met a guy years and years ago by the name of Monty Holm. And Monty was a great business leader. And Monty had this little saying that I heard him say it once, and I asked him to repeat it afterwards, and I wrote it down, and I said it over and over. I love to do hard things. I'm the first to do hard things. I do hard things first. Now, I have to admit to you that when I first heard that, and when I first said that to myself, it was not true of me. It's having said it to myself thousands of times in the decades that it's become true of me. I like to hike. And when I've been on a particularly difficult hike, maybe I'm 10 or 12 miles out, or I've gone up 3,000 feet in elevation over 6 or 8 miles, I'm getting a little bit tired. You might have noticed I'm a little bit older. And I will find myself repeating, almost like a mantra, I love to do hard things. I'm the first to do hard things. I do hard things first. I'm saying it with every step because it keeps me going, because it's a hard thing. I think that too many of us are afraid to do hard things. I was afraid to do hard things. And when I realized the value and virtue in doing something difficult, doing something that took you outside of your comfort zone, doing something that was unexpected, it was a transcendent moment. So I want them to know those things about me. But just as I said a few minutes ago, I'm a dad. I'm a husband. I adore my family. I am so grateful for the patience, the lovingness, the kindness of my wife, the generosity that she holds, that I could never express it. I'm so appreciative of having had the opportunity to be a father and a mentor, and now a friend and father to 4 extraordinary little human beings who aren't little at all anymore. They're in their 30s. My baby is 30 and my oldest is 40. I think students should also know I am dead serious about business. Business done right isn't just about making money, but it does give us the resources that come from making money that let us do things with that money, things that can be good for others around us. See, I'm a capitalist. I'm a capitalist pig. I'm proud of it. A student gave me a t-shirt one time that hangs proudly in my office. It's got a picture of a farm swine on it with the word capitalist written across that pig. And I love that. I love that a student gave it to me, but I also love just the icon of it. I'm a committed capitalist. And I'm dead serious about business, and I'm dead serious about making money because I know that I have a responsibility. As a business owner, I'm responsible to those that own the capital. And more often than not, that's been me. But it's also then rippled down to my family and others that I care about greatly. But if it wasn't myself and my family, it would be others to whom we're responsible. And we're responsible to create profits and surpluses for them. But I think we're responsible to do something else. We're responsible to use those surpluses wisely. We're responsible to use those surpluses generously, not generally. Maybe it's not our obligation. Maybe it's only our privilege to be able to do that. But I think students need to know that about me as well. So I am the capitalist pig, but I'm absolutely committed to the sharing and philanthropy that comes from having been one for a lifetime. So my classes at Westminster College are primarily classes in higher order finance, financial modeling, asset valuation modeling, both at the senior level and at the master's level. Every once in a while I'll have a chance to teach a class of freshmen, and I like doing that because it then gives me the perspective of seeing them grow up in the 4 years that they're with us. But what I want them to take away from my classes here is the recognition that they've built frameworks to help make decisions. And those frameworks, in my case, happen to be finance and Excel models and financial models towards the end of valuation. And we like to look at things through the lens of valuation because every decision made in a company either creates or destroys value for the stakeholders of that company, for the shareholders, the equity stakeholders of that company. So we create those models, those mechanisms, those frameworks. But we're simply creating a framework, which you can create a framework for any aspect of your life. So I want them to understand this is a framework. And once you've created one framework to help you make one type of decision well, you can then visualize, conceptualize how to create many others. And when you do so, you begin to have a framework that you can then gauge your emotional life, your philanthropic life, your physical life, your mental life, maybe even your spiritual life. So I want my students here at Westminster to know those things and to understand that that's what they're getting out of my classes. Yeah, it's numbers, yeah, it's quant, but it's a framework. So it's interesting. I am one of the lucky ones. I went to school. Well, I don't know what I wanted to do at the very first. I think I wanted to do something in business and something in finance. I'd always been interested in that kind of thing. It caused me to have some experiences before college that were a little unusual, where I got to manage some pretty large budgets and some pretty large operations, even as a very young person. But I knew I wanted to do something in business, but very quickly I realized I wanted to be in the investment industry, and then I was able to be. I wanted to be a stockbroker without knowing what a stockbroker did. It just sounded cool, and I'd seen some stockbrokers and made some money with some, and I realized they were making more money off of me probably than I was making with them, and that was okay. But I thought I wanted to be a stockbroker. I got my job. I mean, the job I'd wanted for years I got with Dean Witter. And then my manager, a great man by the name of Bill Phillips, sat me at a desk in a little office in Hayward, California, and said, okay, there's the phone, and there's the phone book. You have your licenses now. Find some clients. And all of a sudden I realized I was a stockbroker, but that meant until I had clients, I was a cold caller. So I learned to make 200 cold calls a day. This is before auto dialers, before you had call waiting, before numbers came up on a screen to show you who was calling, so people actually answered their phones. So we had actually a fighting chance at this. And during the day, I would call businesses, and in the evenings, I would call neighborhoods where I thought people maybe were a little bit more well-off, had higher incomes and higher wealth. And I made 200 dials a day. And it took me a little bit to develop a few clients, and then I developed a few more, and then after a year or so, I didn't have to keep doing that. I was one of the lucky ones. I had the discipline, I had the good fortune, and I was blessed. And I think it just comes down to that. I was fortunate enough to have a wife that was willing to support this. I was fortunate enough to have an intellect that could kind of process some of it. But more importantly than that, I was fortunate enough to have the very generous recommendations and generous time spent on me of some incredible professionals. I began to teach at Westminster College while I was still working on my doctorate at the University of Utah. I was working on economics. There was an opportunity to be an adjunct and teach a macroeconomics course, which I knew just enough about to be dangerous. And so a woman by the name of Maria Rotniak gave me an opportunity to teach here, and then I was able to, a semester or so later, teach another class, and then classes on macroeconomics and microeconomics, and then I had a chance to teach here in a current economic problems class. All the while, I was teaching in a labor economics class at the University of Utah at the same time. I didn't go to school to earn a doctorate to teach. The last thing in the world I thought I was going to do was teach. I expected to end up back in policy or back in private practice, maybe in government or something. Never imagined I'd be in education. And when I taught that first class, had the opportunity to share some things that I'd learned, had the opportunity to interact with some really smart and engaging students, I absolutely loved it. So I knew from my experience at the U, my experience here as an adjunct, that I would love that chance. And then when I graduated, Melissa Kerner, the then dean of the Gore School of Business, gave me an opportunity to teach a finance course. I'd had a professor by the name of Rudy von Artem and another by the name of Kadrina Rada at the U, both of whom suggested that I consider finance, or I consider financial economics, because my career had been in finance, even though now my academic training was in economics. And I wasn't sure that I wanted to do that, but they were absolutely right. When I was given the chance to engage in finance and what I really consider more as financial economics, I realized not only did I have some experience that gave me some ability to connect to it and help others connect to it, but I loved it. And I loved the sharing of it. And I love seeing students come to the college when the semester starts. And I love seeing students tackle problems they don't think they can handle. And at the end of the semester, look back and realize just how much they've learned. I absolutely love that. I love being part of that process. That's a big question. So I now have students that work on multiple continents, that work with small businesses and large businesses, who have taken the little bit that I taught them as a foundation and have learned more and are doing something with it. Students that go on to any profession, that have had professors that approach them with real, genuine interest, with a passion for what the subject matter is, with a commitment to virtuously share, explore, deal with the more difficult issues and the easy ones of any given discipline. Those students take what little they were taught, amplify it by experiences, and if they then can echo that virtue, that passion, that interest, they literally change the world in ripples. I know this sounds very trite, ripples on the pond, kind of trite, right? We might as well sing Kumbaya together. But the fact of the matter is, we do this one good intent at a time. None of us will ever look back and wish we had been less virtuous, or that we'd shared less of ourselves, or that we had loved less, or that we'd been less integrous or less honest. We all wish we had simply been more. I've come to realize, because some very wise people that are yet more experienced, aka old, than I am, that we actually do more than we think we did. Because what we did here, wherever here happens to be, in the life of that one student at that one moment, is replicated as that student does it with more, and as those people do it with more, we end up having done more. We just don't know that we did. So I'm grateful for having had that opportunity, and I know that students can and will change, just as I hopefully have been able to make some minimal changes, some modest changes in my world and the world of those that I'm closest to. A few years ago, Ern Bodvarsson, the then dean of the Gore School of Business, approached me with the idea of forming the Center for Financial Wellness and being the center's first director. He knew that I was interested in financial literacy. He knew that I was deeply interested in economics and finance, and that I also thought of things through a social lens simultaneous to thinking through a dead serious business lens, and gave me the chance to be the director of this newly founded center. The center then went ahead and continued a great tradition that we had of a high school outreach program and a summer camp series for youth. But we then expanded into many other things, including the business certificate series, where we're creating courses that are accessible to people outside of the university system, that are not college classes for which they're getting credit, and they're not as hard and they're not as expensive as those. In fact, in many cases, they're just free. But we created those courses for students and learners. We created courses for students to empower them with their finances here. Things like budgeting and credit and savings, and job market development skills, understanding the art of adulting, and so many of the different things that we need to think about, how to finance higher education. So we've developed these courses that, again, are self-paced, autonomous, asynchronous, so they're online. And we spent a lot of time over the last few years doing this. We work with the Salt Lake County Co-op program, which means we have students that we have taught in finance, accounting, and economics that go out and under the auspices of a county-funded program help small underprivileged businesses that represent low-income households or minority households or any disadvantaged part of our society, and help them strengthen the financial structure of the business so that they can be more successful. See, this is a little bit of our changing the world one person at a time, right? And it's our students doing this. All of that's done within the Center for Financial Wellness. Also under the center's umbrella is the Vita Tax Institute, run by an extraordinarily capable and smart woman by the name of Jovana Sisovic. The Tax Institute does thousands of free income tax returns every season through a grant offered by the IRS, and largely to underrepresented and underprivileged households, but they don't turn anyone away. Wealthy, poor, smart, challenged, it makes no difference. The Vita Tax Institute will do their entire state and federal tax return for free. That's a tremendous opportunity. So through the center, we've developed all of these, and there's more to go. I won't tell you what they are because then I'm committed to them, and it'll take me a while to get some of them done. But you should just know that we've barely scratched the surface of this. We will do more because donors have helped us do this, because students have stepped up to stretch and do things they didn't think they can do, and because we love to do hard things, and we do hard things first. So throughout my career, I was very fortunate. I was able to look at the world of investments and society through an economic lens, not because I'd taken a lot of economics, but because I had been really interested in the little economics I took. And even though in my major I didn't have to have much more, in my career I fed myself. I read about, I went to lectures about, I listened to things. We didn't have TED Talks back 30 or 40 years ago like we do today, but we still had enough access to things that I was able to really learn a lot about economics from a layperson's standpoint while I was in my career. And I knew in doing that I wanted to understand more. I knew enough to carry on a conversation, but not with the most experienced, not with the most learned, and I didn't like that. And sometimes I found myself on panels or in discussions or in rooms with people that knew a lot more about these things than I did, and I wanted to be one of them, and the only way I could get there was through an advanced education in economics. There wasn't going to be enough experience to get me there. I had to apply some foundational theoretical understanding. So when I had a chance to have a successful sale of a business and take a few years away from major income generation, I took the opportunity to first prepare for that with a master's in economics, then to go into a doctoral program. And I chose to do so at the University of Utah, not because it was the school that I longed to go to. I mean, I'd gone to BYU, of course. The University of Utah was the other side of the mountain. You know, it was the arch rival, if you will. But it was also the school that was the closest to me, and they happened to have had a very highly respected program, but it was a heterodox economics program, and I didn't know what that meant. I very quickly realized that some people thought it meant that it was a very liberal program, and there literally were professors that had gone through and were teaching in that program that had been card-carrying communists, and they were proud of it, and they offered great input. And there were people that were very conservative as well, and they offered great input. Heterodox simply means holistic. It simply means broad-based, willing to consider numerous viewpoints, not just any given one. And when I came to realize that that's what it meant, and when I came to saw how these different extraordinary minds executed against that, I was fascinated. I went from having chosen the University of Utah because it was 25 or 30 miles from my home, and it meant that I didn't need to move, and my wife and children didn't deserve to be caused to move so that I could go through a little bit more education at the time. But I went from selecting it because it was the only decent selection I really had, to then being extraordinarily grateful that it was the one in my proximity. It gave me a perspective. It gave me a vantage point, if you will, to look at economics not from just one narrow slice, because you can look at economics from a very narrow slice, and it's dangerous when you do that. But to be able to recognize the virtue of what's in that slice and what's around the sides of it, and that the pie is bigger and bigger and bigger than most of us will ever recognize. I certainly don't have the mind to really capture the entirety of the global economy, but I can understand the slice and a little bit more. And because of the training that I received there in that kind of a program, it let me do that and maybe a little bit more still. And so why did I choose it? It was right there. In retrospect, would I have chosen anything else? Absolutely not. So through the work that I do at the college and some work I do outside of the college, I'm fortunate to be able to be exposed to many small businesses every year. And having owned my own businesses for 30 plus years, I have a real affinity for business ownership and the plight, if you will, of the small business owner. And very often, small business owners don't come to business prepared for it. They have an idea. Maybe it has something to do with finance or investment, as mine did, but more often than not, it doesn't. And many of these people are well schooled in what their idea is about. And school doesn't necessarily mean higher education schooled or formal education schooled. It may be experience schooled. But they get into business and realize that in order to survive in business, they need to know the language of business. And maybe their preparation prior to that didn't give that to them. Or maybe it's not a business person at all. It's somebody that's going to school right now in gender studies or focused on engineering or something in one of the other sciences. And they realize if I only could somehow develop a little bit of business acumen, maybe I don't want to go to another whole program in college or take college courses, but I need to understand the language of business. I need to understand enough about accounting, finance, investment, and tax to be able to talk to bankers, to be able to talk to maybe subordinates, or maybe even people higher up in the C-suite that I might not be in. So we developed the Business Certificate Series as a way of giving people an exposure to accounting, finance, investments, taxation, not from the very micro level where it's a lot of rigorous coursework, but from the 50,000 foot level, where they can get a sense of it, learn its language, understand enough about how the numbers come together that they can utilize them, they can manage with them. We're not trying to turn people into accountants or finance professionals. We're trying to help them understand enough about finance, enough about accounting, enough about investment so they can utilize these things. When I talk to small business people and when I talk to those that are getting involved in somebody else's business, maybe as a manager, I often find myself telling them that there are two kinds of business people. Those that understand the numbers and those that are controlled by others who understand the numbers. You don't need to be an accountant to understand the numbers. You need to be able to look at the statements. You need to be able to hear what's being given to you and put them in perspective. So we put together this series, and it's a tremendous effort on the part of the students that have worked with me on this. And we put together this series that is asynchronous, so it's fully online through a series of videos and quizzes and projects. It is autonomous, which means that we don't have to have faculty interacting all the time. We let the system, the content management system, do that. It is self-paced, so somebody that wants to get into it and spend a month and go through it quickly can do so. Frankly, most of these you can spend a weekend and go through quickly, or somebody's only got an hour or two here and there, can take a few months to go through the thing. And at the end of it, when they've successfully completed this, they get a certificate from the Bill and Vive Gore School of Business that says, I have learned something about business. But more importantly, they've been imparted with the opportunity to learn the language of business and with some experiences that have caused them to show that they've learned that. I think it's tremendously valuable. And I have to admit, even though I went to school as an undergraduate many, many years ago in a business or a finance-related field, by the time I owned my own business, I had forgotten enough about income statements, balance sheets, return on equity, internal growth rates, and all the different things you might have to think about in the tax system. I'd forgotten enough about those things that I then fell prey sometimes to not knowing as much as I should have. I wish I'd have had an opportunity like this. So people have the ability to engage with us at this level through a business certificate series. And I'm grateful for it. And frankly, I have really enjoyed it in interacting with students putting this together. My name is Rick Haskell, and I'd like to thank you for watching this video as part of the Bill and Vive Gore School of Business's Business Certificate Series. I'm a finance professor in the business school, where I'm also the director for the college's Center for Financial Wellness. The Business Certificate Series is offered through the Center as part of our outreach through the Gore School of Business. You can follow us on social media through Westminster's Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook pages. You can use the QR codes provided or simply go to these websites. Thank you.